Bilal Coulibaly is shooting up draft boards as we get closer to draft night. This is Floor and Ceiling, let's break him down. The 6'7" long athletic wing is peaking at the perfect moment. He's one of the few prospects still playing, and Coulibaly is starting to rise into lottery contention. I'll have him slotted around the late teens on my big board. He had a very complimentary role for Metropolitan's 92 for most of the year. In fact, he only truly cracked the pro team's rotation around January. So for most of his minutes at the highest level, Coulibaly has had a tiny usage rate, under 14%, and he's mostly getting fed off cuts, spot-ups, or transition play. As a pro, Coulibaly has been at his best off the ball, although he hasn't really been used in too many other ways. The Frenchman is a very good athlete, long and twitchy with some real speed and bounce. Mets 92 has put that to good use by employing him as a cutter. Bilal is hard to stop when he's moving downhill with the ball. Coulibaly plays with force, but I also think he's shown some nice touch. It's not just athleticism all of the time. Clearly though, the 18-year-old can play in the dunker or above the rim with easy catch and finishes. This also shows up on the boards. Coulibaly's rebounding numbers will not pop off the page because everything with the pros is a small sample size, but I think he has the means to do well here, and he did so at lower levels. Everything that we've just touched on is accentuated even more in transition. The quickness, the burst, how he plays above the rim. The French wing has had to do some adjusting stepping up to the pros, but I generally find him very interesting on the break. Coulibaly had more room to experiment earlier in the season with Mets 92's youth team, but I buy into what he's flashing, even when it doesn't quite come off. In the open court, Coulibaly has a lot of space to take advantage of his long strides. He can go from end to end in a very short time. Sure, his ball handling isn't that tight or creative right now, but Bilal is so fast that it might not matter too much. It's okay enough. Already, he's trusted to push off opponent misses. And then, the Frenchman can also do the easier things. Coulibaly is a great vertical athlete and a speedy north to south runner, so he can get going off simple dunks or rim runs on the break. Beating his man down the floor isn't too hard for him. Coulibaly is only averaging about 6 points with Mets 92's senior team this season, but I really like his efficiency at nearly 62% true shooting. Again, keep in mind that Coulibaly is barely being used, which is sort of a double-edged sword because of the small sample size, but Bilal is making 38% of his threes, having taken 45 triples this season. He shoots less than 1.5 trey per game on just 20 minutes a night, but that's not enough, clearly. That's gonna have to go up, no way around it. Still, I think Coulibaly has definitely improved his consistency, and this season he's taken a step forward as a jump shooter. Looking ahead, he'll have to prove that he can replicate this efficiency on higher volume. With Metropolitan's youth team, he shot 32% from 3 on 4 treys per game, which isn't terrible, but keep in mind, he was the go-to guy there. I'm also going to want to see how Bilal does with a more rigorous shot diet, and once he faces increased defensive attention. But if Coulibaly keeps making threes, then he's already shown glimpses that he can attack a closeout. His handle is still kinda upright, more on that in a bit, but Bilal is fluid and he already has somewhat of a foundation here. The Frenchman is really shooting up draft boards these days into the teens, and I can see why. It definitely helps that he's still playing when the vast majority of prospects are not, but Coulibaly has looked increasingly comfortable since getting into the pro squad this January. Now, during the team's playoff run, he's really risen to the occasion. Coulibaly is pacing himself, understanding how to use his length, and he's even manipulating defenses. I think it's Bilal's timing that I'm most impressed with. Whereas he was prone to rushing things earlier this season, he's now taking his time. reading the bigs, scanning the floor, and then making assertive decisions. In all honesty, it's incredibly quick and impressive growth. Before, I'd only really seen this level of craft on his youth team. There, Coulibaly showed some shake from time to time that I think could be tapped into in the future, but for the moment, I consider him to mostly be a straight line driver. That poses its limitations. Bilal isn't comfortable operating in tight spaces yet. He gets some self-creation reps, but even on his youth team, Coulibaly was utilized off the ball quite a bit. I don't think Coulibaly has as much shake as he could given his level of athleticism. His handle is basic, so he can play too upright. And that limits how he gets to his spots, even if Bilal can get there through a combination of his tools. When plan A doesn't work, Coulibaly can still find a solution. He's a high-level athlete with a plus motor and a budding handle, so there's a ton of promise there. He will have to get stronger though, and I think his frame is on the skinnier side for a wing, although definitely not to a concerning degree. Looking at his shot and self-creation outside of spot-ups, it's still rough, but there is also some upside. Throughout all of this, let's remember that Coulibaly is still going to be 18 on draft night, so that's a big factor. At this point in his development though, most of that self-creation is going to come off drives, I feel. Coulibaly's not a poor shooter, his numbers are fine, but he lacks consistency, and especially chances to show this part of his game off. He's not going to take too many jumpers off the bounce with the pros, so we have some tape of him with Metropolitan's 92's youth team. Bilal had a bigger role there, he was still off the ball a fair amount, but his usage leapt up from 14% with the pros to 27%. Something that's very encouraging is that Coulibaly kept his 63% true shooting, so what I'm truly focusing on here is how this translates. A big thing is that the disparity in level of competition is huge, and sometimes his process doesn't look that translatable, given Coulibaly's limitations with his handle and pickup. So even if he might be a ways away, we should also read into Bilal taking these shots. His coaching staff trusts him, the jumper is slowish but nowhere near broken. The lower body might be too rigid, but Coulibaly is a willing shooter from the mid-range and from deep. So all of this really pertains to his NBA ceiling much more than his floor. As I've been touching on, his handle and playmaking still need work. The first is that Coulibaly barely got any ball handling reps with the pros until the French League playoffs just now, as surprising as that may sound. He's been good, but we're dealing with not even a full month of play. Prior to that, I feel like most of what he's shown is very basic. Coulibaly's handle is not inventive, he almost always wants to go in a straight line, and he's inconsistent about getting low to the floor. He is fluid, but I don't trust him to create separation off the dribble until some big polish occurs. At this juncture, Bilal is almost entirely constrained to spot-ups or one-dribble jumpers. The Frenchman is more versatile when it comes to passing. The half-court signs in particular have been great to see, but once again, they're very recent. So take all of these reads with a grain of salt, but I still think there's a realistic idea about Coulibaly being one day a secondary or tertiary ball handler. He averaged about 1 assist per game as a pro, but more than doubled that with his youth team. The French wing at least has a base level understanding of how to use a screen, even if he is still very green overall. Bilal will be able to pass over the top of defenses, and hopefully he'll be able to play off the pressure that he generates in the paint. This season, I think there's been some translatable stuff already showing up from time to time in transition. However, being realistic, Coulibaly is some seasons away from adding authentic value as a facilitator. Even beyond the improvements he has to make with his handle, I don't think he's ever really had a sustained chance to consistently be a primary initiator, let alone make high-level reads. And so, at times, you can still see that with his game and with his turnovers. Bilal Coulibaly has a very safe floor and a very high ceiling on defense. He's right up there with the best defensive prospects in this class. The Frenchman has 38 steals and blocks combined in less than 700 pro minutes, but I think it's his numbers at the lower level that are most indicative. For Metropolitan's 92's youth team, Coulibaly had 60 steals and blocks together in 16 games this season. He was just flat out dominant, but I think we see this regardless of whoever he plays against. The team that drafts Coulibaly is going to get a 6'7" wing with endless arms who can hound ball handlers at the point of attack. The Frenchman can slide and smother, and he really has no problems at all keeping his man in front of him. He's already very advanced and coordinated on this side of the ball. Coulibaly makes multiple efforts, and his length is a tremendous asset, but it's also how he uses it. There are times where he's just making the most of his tools, but I also think the 18-year-old shows real understanding. Here, it's really impressive how he's zoning up the weak side. Or, in this clip, Bilal has great awareness, sinking and getting the steal. On this one, Coulibaly is causing problems from the start, tracking and getting the deflection. This hasn't quite manifested on the stat sheet yet, but I also think Coulibaly has real potential protecting the rim. That's always a bonus when it comes from a wing, and in Bilal's case, he might even be playing the two sometimes. Some of this footage stems from Coulibaly having the athletic and skill edge on inferior competition, so you can only read into it so much, but in general, I think the length is always an issue for attackers. So it's going to be about timing and positioning. As for improvement points, there aren't really any pressing ones if I'm being honest. The biggest thing is probably just youth and inexperience. Coulibaly needs more minutes to keep developing. If he gets them though, there's already reason to think that he's going to continue improving at a very fast rate. As of now, there's room for him to get stronger, but hey, he's just 18. There's times where maybe he's too antsy, or he presses up on his man too much, but things like that will be ironed out in time. The most vital thing is that Coulibaly is a legitimately good defender who's earned minutes in that role as a pro. He has tons of room to keep improving while fitting the positional needs of the NBA to a T. Bilal Coulibaly is looking like an incredible two-way prospect. Right now, I still have him more so towards the late teens, early 20s, rather than the early teens. But I really think that the swing skill for him really is just that, skill in general. Can he ever become a guy who you trust with the ball in his hands a lot of the time? Or is he always going to be more of a complementary player, sort of thriving off of spot-ups, cuts, defensive plays, transition, etc. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a comment telling me what you think of Bilal Coulibaly, and if you enjoy the channel, if you want to watch more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Take care, and I'll catch you guys next time.